The Fly didn't just scare audiences in 1958, it traumatized them. A scientist's head gets swapped with an insect, his wife becomes a killer, and one tiny scene with a spider, it haunted an entire generation. These are 20 weird facts about The Fly, and buried in the horror, a makeup artist who quit Hollywood forever after what he created. Stand back. This experiment goes wrong fast. Number 1. Before Vincent Price ever screamed at a spider web, before the makeup effects were designed, before cameras even rolled, The Fly was just 8 pages long. French author Georges Langeland wrote it as a short story for Playboy magazine in 1957, and it wasn't meant to be deep. It was pulp fiction, a quick sci-fi thriller sandwiched between pin-ups and cocktail recipes. The story was simple, direct, disturbing. A man experiments with matter transportation, a fly gets in the machine, bodies get scrambled, done. But something about those 8 pages stuck. Editor Walter Reed Jr. read it and saw more than just another monster tale. He saw genuine horror wrapped in domestic tragedy. He bought the rights immediately, convinced it could be a film. The studio, 20th Century Fox, wasn't so sure. They thought it was too grim, too strange, too small for theaters. But Reed pushed back. He said the horror wasn't in the creature, it was in the helplessness. A brilliant man reduced to an insect, begging his wife to kill him. That's not just scary, that's devastating. And he was right. What started as throwaway magazine fiction became one of the most iconic horror films of the 1,950 seconds, proving sometimes the shortest stories leave the deepest scars. Number 2. Vincent Price didn't want to do it. By 1958, he was already becoming synonymous with horror, typecast as the elegant villain with the sinister smile. He'd done House of Wax, he'd done The Mad Magician, and he was tired of playing monsters and madmen. When the script for The Fly landed on his desk, he almost turned it down immediately. Another horror film, another creature feature, another paycheck in a genre he was desperate to escape. But then he read it, and something changed. Price realized his character, François Delambre, wasn't the monster. He was the witness, the brother trying to piece together a nightmare he couldn't understand. He wasn't cackling over a laboratory, he was grieving, investigating, slowly unraveling the truth about his brother's death. It was a supporting role, but it had weight. Tragedy instead of camp. So Price said yes, but on one condition. He wanted to play it straight, no theatrics, no villain posturing, just a man drowning in disbelief. Director Kurt Newman agreed. And what Price delivered was something unexpected. Quiet horror, restrained panic, a performance that grounded the entire film in reality, making the unbelievable feel devastatingly real. Years later, Price admitted The Fly was one of the few horror films he was actually proud of. Not because of the scares, but because of the sorrow. Number 3. The makeup for the fly-headed scientist wasn't created by a Hollywood legend. It was designed by a man named Ben Nye, a studio makeup artist who'd worked on everything from musicals to westerns. He'd never done horror before, never built a monster, never even worked with prosthetics on this scale. But when the studio came calling, he didn't hesitate. He just didn't know what he was getting into. The design was brutal. Nye had to create a full head appliance that looked like a giant housefly, complete with bulging compound eyes, twitching mandibles, and a grotesque insect texture. But it also had to be expressive enough for the audience to feel the human trapped inside. That balance, insect and agony, took weeks to perfect. Nye sculpted dozens of prototypes, testing materials, adjusting proportions, trying to make something that was horrifying but heartbreaking. When actor David Hedison finally wore the finished piece, he could barely see, could barely breathe, and couldn't speak at all. Every scene required him to communicate through body language alone, trapped inside latex and foam, suffocating under studio lights. The makeup took 3 hours to apply and another hour to remove, leaving Hedison's skin raw and blistered. But it worked. Audiences recoiled. Critics called it nightmare fuel. And Nye, overwhelmed by what he'd created, quietly stepped away from horror effects forever. He said he never wanted to build something that disturbing again. Number 4. Patricia Owens was supposed to be the victim, the terrified housewife watching her husband transform into a monster, screaming, crying, fainting at the horror of it all. That's what the studio wanted, a damsel in distress to anchor the male-driven sci-fi tragedy. But Owens had other ideas. She read the script and saw something darker. Her character, Hélène Delambre, wasn't just a witness. She was the one who had to make the impossible choice, to kill the man she loved because he begged her to. That's not weakness, that's devastation. So Owens pushed back. She told director Kurt Neumann she wouldn't play Hélène as fragile. She'd play her as strong, as a woman forced into an unthinkable act and then forced to live with it. Neumann hesitated. This was 1958. Female characters in horror were supposed to faint, not commit mercy killings. But Owens wouldn't budge. She delivered her performance with steel beneath the sorrow. A wife who loved her husband enough to become his executioner. The result shattered expectations. Hélène became one of the most complex women in 1950 seconds horror. A character defined not by her screams, but by her silence. And Owens, she gave the performance of her career. Years later, she said, The Fly haunted her, not because of the monster, but because she understood exactly why Hélène did what she did. And that, she said, was the real horror. Number 5. The most famous scene in the entire film, the tiny fly with a human head trapped in a spider's web crying, "Help me, help me," almost didn't happen. It wasn't in the original short story. It wasn't in the first draft of the screenplay. It was added late in production, a last-minute idea to bookend the horror with one final gut punch. And the studio hated it. Executives thought it was too much, too grotesque, too ridiculous. A miniature human head on a fly body, screaming in a tiny voice while a spider closed in. They said audiences would laugh, not scream. But director Kurt Neumann fought for it. He believed that image, absurd as it sounded, would be the thing people remembered. He was right. When test audiences saw it, the theater went silent. Not because they were laughing, because they were horrified. That single moment, maybe 10 seconds of screen time, became the most iconic shot of the film. It showed up in parodies, in homages, in nightmares. Vincent Price later said he received letters for years from people who couldn't get that tiny voice out of their heads. The studio had wanted to cut it to save time and money. Instead, it became the reason the movie became legendary. Sometimes the thing that seems too strange to work is exactly what makes it unforgettable. Number 6. The Fly was shot in CinemaScope and deluxe color, which in 1958 was Hollywood's way of saying this isn't just another B-movie creature feature. Fox wanted spectacle. Wide shots, vibrant colors, production value that made audiences feel like they were watching something prestigious. But here's the problem. Horror doesn't always benefit from beauty. Director Kurt Neumann knew this. He didn't want the film to look polished. He wanted shadows, grit, claustrophobia. But the studio insisted, so Neumann did something clever. He used the bright, colorful cinematography against itself. The Delambre mansion was shot in warm, inviting tones, making it feel safe, domestic, normal. But once the horror began, those same beautiful colors turned sickly. The laboratory glowed with unnatural greens and blues. Blood looked too vivid. The fly head appeared even more grotesque under perfect lighting. What should have softened, the horror made it worse. Audiences weren't expecting something this disturbing to look this good. That contrast, beauty and nightmare existing in the same frame, became one of the film's most unsettling qualities. CinemaScope was meant to sell tickets. Instead, it made the terror inescapable. You couldn't look away because there was nowhere safe to look. Every corner of the frame held something wrong. And Neumann proved that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones lurking in shadows. They're the ones standing in broad daylight. Number 7. David Hedison, the actor who played André Delambre, the doomed scientist, spent most of the film hidden behind that grotesque fly mask. His face, his expressions, his eyes, all of it buried under latex and foam. He couldn't convey emotion through dialogue because the mask muffled his voice. He couldn't rely on facial expressions because no one could see him, so he had to act with his body. Every movement, every gesture, every desperate flail of his arms had to communicate what words couldn't, and it nearly broke him. Hedison later admitted the role was the most physically and emotionally exhausting performance of his career. He spent hours under hot studio lights, vision obscured, breath limited, skin burning under the prosthetics. Between takes, he'd collapse into a chair, unable to remove the mask without the 3-hour removal process. He felt trapped, suffocated, isolated, exactly like the character, and that wasn't an accident. Hedison said the physical torment informed the performance in ways he never anticipated. He wasn't acting terrified, he was terrified. He wasn't pretending to be trapped, he was trapped. That authenticity, born from genuine suffering, bled into every frame. When Andre stumbles through the lab, clawing at the equipment, smashing beakers in frustration, that's not just acting, that's a man at his breaking point. And audiences felt it, because Hedison made them feel it. Number 8. The film's budget was shockingly small for a major studio production, under $500,000, which even in 1958 was considered modest. Fox didn't expect The Fly to be a hit. They saw it as filler, a quick genre piece to keep theaters occupied between bigger releases. So they cut corners. Minimal sets, limited shooting schedule, a cast of mostly unknowns except for Vincent Price, who wasn't even the lead. Director Kurt Newman had maybe 3 weeks to shoot the entire film. No time for reshoots, no room for experimentation, just fast, efficient filmmaking. But that limitation forced creativity. Newman couldn't rely on elaborate special effects or expensive set pieces. He had to build tension through performance, through editing, through what you didn't see more than what you did. The teleportation machine was just a set piece with flashing lights. The Fly transformation happened mostly off-screen. The real horror came from implication, from watching characters react to atrocities the camera never fully showed. And somehow, it worked. The Fly became one of the highest-grossing films of 1958, earning over $3 million in its initial run. That's a 6-fold return on investment, a financial miracle. The studio that barely funded it suddenly wanted sequels, spin-offs, remakes, all because a director with no money and no time figured out that sometimes less is more, especially when the monster lives in your imagination. Number 9. Kurt Newman never got to see his film become a classic. He died in August 1958, just weeks after The Fly premiered in theaters, a sudden, unexpected death from a heart attack at age 50. By the time the film became a box office phenomenon, by the time critics started reevaluating it, by the time it spawned sequels and cemented its place in horror history, Newman was gone. He never knew what he'd created. Friends said he was exhausted during production, working around the clock to finish the film on budget and on schedule. Some speculated the stress contributed to his death. Others said it was just tragic timing. But everyone agreed on one thing. Newman believed in The Fly when no one else did. He fought for the spider scene. He defended the makeup design. He insisted on playing the horror straight instead of campy, and he never lived to see any of it validated. The Fly became his final film, his unintentional masterpiece, a legacy he never got to claim. Vincent Price later dedicated his autobiography section on the film to Newman's memory, calling him an underrated visionary who understood that true horror doesn't come from monsters. It comes from the moment you realize you've become one. Number 10. When The Fly hit theaters in July 1958, critics weren't kind. They called it exploitative, grotesque, cheap sensationalism dressed up as science fiction. The New York Times dismissed it as a silly horror picture. Variety said it was too repulsive for general audiences. Even fans of the genre weren't sure what to make of it. This wasn't a man in a rubber suit stomping through Tokyo. This was body horror, existential dread, a man literally losing his humanity one molecule at a time. It was too disturbing for casual moviegoers, too serious for B-movie fans, too strange for mainstream critics. But audiences didn't care what the reviews said. They showed up anyway. Theaters were packed. Word of mouth spread. People weren't just watching it once. They were bringing friends, daring them to sit through the spider scene. The Fly became a cultural event, not because critics praised it, but because it hit a nerve no one knew was exposed. It tapped into Cold War anxieties about science gone wrong, about progress without ethics, about technology turning humanity into something unrecognizable. And 50 years before body horror became a recognized subgenre, before Cronenberg made it art, The Fly was already there, quietly traumatizing audiences one tiny scream at a time. Number 11. The teleportation machine wasn't high-tech movie magic. It was plywood, Christmas lights, and prayer. The prop department had almost no budget for the disintegrator-reintegrator chamber that drives the entire plot, so they improvised. They built a wooden cabinet, lined it with reflective panels, strung up colored bulbs, and added a fog machine for atmosphere. When the cameras rolled and the machine supposedly transported matter across the laboratory, what you're actually seeing is timed lighting cues and David Hedison stepping in and out of a glorified telephone booth. No special effects team, no optical wizardry, just practical stagecraft that somehow sold the illusion. The sound design did most of the heavy lifting. That distinctive electronic hum, the crackling energy, the sense of molecular disintegration, all of it manufactured in post-production by sound engineers who'd never worked on science fiction before. They recorded everything from electrical transformers to sheet metal being shaken, then layered it together until it sounded alien and dangerous. On set, actors performed in complete silence, reacting to machinery that made no noise at all. But in the final cut, the disintegrator felt real, menacing, powerful, a testament to creativity under constraint. Because sometimes the best special effects aren't effects at all. They're talented people making you believe in something that was never really there. Number 12. The film's climax, where Helene crushes her transformed husband under a hydraulic press, was considered so shocking that several countries demanded cuts. The British Board of Film Censors flagged it as excessively violent. France, despite the story's French origins, nearly banned it outright. In Germany, distributors removed the entire pressing sequence, leaving audiences confused about how André actually died. Australia rated it adults only. The controversy wasn't just about the violence, it was about who committed it. A wife killing her husband, even in mercy, even at his desperate request, violated 1,952 social expectations. Women were supposed to be nurturers, not executioners, but director Kurt Neumann refused to soften it. He knew that moment, brutal as it was, carried the film's entire emotional weight. This wasn't a monster movie where the hero destroys the creature. This was a tragedy where love demanded an unforgivable act. Patricia Owens later said shooting that scene required multiple takes because she kept breaking down between setups. The psychological toll of repeatedly pantomiming her character's darkest moment became too much. But Neumann pushed through, knowing the scene had to feel devastating or the entire film would collapse. And it worked. That moment of horror transcended cultures and censorship. It became the image audiences couldn't unsee, the choice they couldn't stop debating, the tragedy that made The Fly unforgettable. Number 13. Vincent Price's most famous moment in the film, discovering the tiny fly-headed creature in the spider's web, was shot in complete silence. No musical score, no sound effects, just Price's voice trembling as he calls for help. That decision, made late in editing, transformed the scene from grotesque to genuinely heartbreaking. Originally, composer Paul Sawtelle had written dramatic orchestral stings for the discovery, typical horror movie punctuation. But when they tested the scene with music, something felt wrong. The score made it campy, almost laughable, so they stripped it away entirely, leaving only Price's performance and the tiny, desperate voice crying for help. The silence forced audiences to confront the horror without emotional guidance. No music told them how to feel. They just had to sit with it. That image of a creature too small to save itself, begging for mercy from a man who could barely comprehend what he was seeing. Price later said he improvised most of his dialogue in that scene. The stammering disbelief, the rising panic as he realizes his brother's consciousness is trapped in that dying insect. None of it was scripted. It was just an actor responding honestly to an impossible situation. And that authenticity, wrapped in silence, created one of the most disturbing moments in 1,950-second cinema. Sometimes horror doesn't need music. Sometimes it just needs truth. Number 14. The sequel came fast, too fast. Return of the Fly hit theaters in 1959, barely a year after the original. Fox wanted to capitalize on the success immediately, before audiences forgot about the first film. But everything that made The Fly work was missing. The budget was slashed. The film was shot in black and white to save money. The script was rushed, the cast mostly unknowns, and Vincent Price, the only returning actor, looked tired, contractually obligated rather than creatively invested. Director Edward Burns tried his best with limited resources, but you can't resurrect magic on a shoestring. The makeup effects were cheaper, the teleportation machine somehow looked worse despite being made a year later, and the story, about Andre's son repeating his father's mistakes, felt less like tragedy and more like tired repetition. Critics savaged it. Audiences showed up out of curiosity but left disappointed. Even Fox admitted internally that they'd moved too quickly, trying to squeeze profit from a premise that had already said everything it needed to say. Return of the Fly became a cautionary tale about sequel desperation, proof that sometimes lightning doesn't strike twice, especially when you're using bargain basement special effects and a script written in 3 weeks. The original had been accidental brilliance. The sequel was just business. Number 15. 28 years later, David Cronenberg changed everything. His 1986 remake of The Fly wasn't a remake at all. It was a reinvention. Cronenberg understood what the original grasped instinctively. Body horror is personal. It's about watching yourself become something you don't recognize. So he stripped away the 1,950 seconds melodrama, the perfect suburban household, the noble sacrifice, and replaced it with something raw and visceral. Jeff Goldblum's Seth Brundle doesn't just swap heads with a fly. He slowly, grotesquely transforms, losing pieces of himself, shedding fingernails and teeth, watching his humanity decay one mutation at a time. It was everything the 1958 version implied but couldn't show, and it was a massive critical and commercial success, proving the core concept was timeless. But here's what's strange. Cronenberg said he never watched the original film all the way through. He read the short story, understood the premise, then ignored everything else. He didn't want to be influenced by Vincent Price or Patricia Owens or Kurt Newman's choices. He wanted to make his own nightmare. And he did. His version became the definitive Fly for a new generation, so much so that many people don't even know a 1958 version exists. But the original never disappeared. It just evolved, proving that sometimes the best tribute isn't imitation, it's transformation. Number 16. The spider used in the famous web scene wasn't trained, wasn't drugged, wasn't cooperating. It was just a regular garden spider pulled from outside the studio and placed on a miniature set. The prop department built a tiny web, positioned the mechanical fly-headed creature, and released the spider, hoping it would move toward its supposed prey. It didn't. For hours, the spider refused to budge. It would crawl away from the setup, ignore the miniature victim, groom itself instead of attacking. The crew tried everything, adjusting the lighting, adding vibrations to the web to simulate trapped prey, even gently prodding the spider with tiny brushes. Nothing worked. Finally, after nearly an entire day of failed attempts, the spider moved. Almost by accident, it crawled toward the fly creature, touched it with its legs, began wrapping it as spiders do. The cameras rolled. Vincent Price delivered his horrified reaction. The scene was captured in one continuous take because everyone knew they'd never get the spider to cooperate again. That moment of accidental timing, a real spider behaving naturally for just long enough, became the most iconic shot in the film. Nature doesn't follow scripts, but sometimes, when you're patient enough, it gives you exactly what you need. Number 17. Patricia Owens never escaped Hélène Delambre. For the rest of her career, every role was compared to The Fly. Casting directors saw her as the woman who killed her husband, the tragic wife turned mercy killer. She tried branching into other genres, comedy, romance, adventure films, but audiences only remembered her crushing David Hedison under that press. In interviews years later, Owens admitted the role both made and limited her career. It gave her recognition but trapped her in typecasting. Studios wanted her for variations on the same character: suffering women, tragic wives, mothers driven to desperate acts. She became synonymous with elegant anguish, beautiful devastation. By the 1,960 seconds, she'd largely retired from film, exhausted by the shadow The Fly cast over everything else she tried to do, but she never regretted it. She said playing Hélène taught her something about acting she'd never understood before, that the most powerful performances come from places you're afraid to go, that sometimes you have to embrace darkness to find truth, and that truth, however uncomfortable, however career-defining, was worth it, because decades later, people still remembered her name, not because she was in dozens of films, but because she was unforgettable in one. Number 18. The film spawned one of the strangest pieces of merchandise in 1,950 seconds horror history. In 1959, a toy company released a fly-themed board game aimed at children. Yes, children. The game involved players trying to help a scientist trapped as a fly escape from a spider's web before time ran out. The box featured cartoon versions of the film's most traumatic imagery, rendered in bright primary colors with smiling faces. Fox licensed it without fully considering the absurdity. Parents were horrified. Child psychologists wrote op-eds about the inappropriateness of turning body horror into family game night. Some stores refused to stock it. Others placed it behind counters, selling it only to adults who specifically requested it. The game became a collector's curiosity, a bizarre artifact of an era when studios would license literally anything if it made money. Today, original copies sell for hundreds of dollars, not because the game was good, it was terrible, but because it represents one of Hollywood's most tone-deaf merchandising decisions, turning a film about molecular disintegration and mercy killing into children's entertainment. Sometimes the weirdest facts aren't about how movies were made. They're about what happened after, when commerce overtook common sense. Number 19. Kurt Neumann's death wasn't just tragic timing. Some crew members believed the film was cursed. Not in any supernatural sense, but in the way projects sometimes carry weight beyond their production. Neumann died of a heart attack. David Hedison suffered permanent skin damage from the makeup. Patricia Owens developed chronic nightmares about the role. Even Vincent Price, who remained professionally distant from most of his horror work, admitted The Fly stayed with him in ways other films didn't. He said the image of that tiny creature, begging for death, would flash into his mind at random moments for years afterward. The film demanded something from everyone who touched it, extracted a psychological toll that went beyond normal filmmaking stress. Maybe it was the subject matter, the intimate horror of watching someone lose their humanity. Maybe it was the rushed production schedule that pushed everyone past their limits. Or maybe some stories are just darker than others, carrying shadows that cling to the people who tell them. The Fly wasn't cursed in any Hollywood myth sense, but it left marks. On careers, on psyches, on memories, and everyone who worked on it carried those marks long after the cameras stopped rolling. Number 20. The legacy of The Fly isn't just in remakes and sequels, it's in how it changed what horror could be. Before 1958, monster movies followed a formula. Creature threatens town, hero destroys creature, order restored. But The Fly didn't have a hero. It had victims. Everyone in the film loses. André loses his humanity. Helene loses her husband and her innocence. Francois loses his brother and his faith in science. Even The Fly, that tiny consciousness trapped in a dying insect body, loses everything. There's no victory, no restoration of order, just grief and questions. That willingness to end in devastation, to refuse the comfort of a happy resolution, influenced generations of horror filmmakers. From Cronenberg's body horror to modern psychological terror, the DNA of The Fly persists. It proved that the scariest monsters aren't external threats, they're transformations. The horror of becoming something unrecognizable, of losing yourself piece by piece while everyone you love watches helplessly. That's not just science fiction. That's human fear distilled into its purest form. And that's why, 65 years later, people still can't forget that tiny voice crying for help. Bonus fact: after principal photography wrapped, the studio nearly discarded the fly-headed prop used in the famous spider web scene. It was considered just another piece of set dressing, destined for the trash or a studio warehouse. But Ben Nye, the makeup artist who'd created the full-sized fly head for David Hedison, quietly took it home. Not as a trophy, but because he couldn't bear the thought of it being destroyed. He kept it in his garage for decades, wrapped in cloth, hidden in a box, rarely shown to anyone. Friends who knew about it said Nye seemed almost protective of it, like the prop carried some residual tragedy from the film. When Nye passed away in 1986, the same year Cronenberg's remake premiered, his family discovered the prop and donated it to a film museum. Today it sits in a climate-controlled display case, that tiny human face frozen in permanent anguish, its mouth open in an eternal silent scream. Museum visitors stop, stare, sometimes photograph it, but mostly they just stand there, uncomfortable, unable to look away from a piece of latex and paint that somehow still carries the weight of one of cinema's most disturbing images. Because some props aren't just props, they're nightmares that refuse to die.